MCP and AI and all of these new advancements are potentially increasing fragmentation inside of organizations as opposed to decreasing it.
That is a problem because you can get business users who have the impression that they're moving very quickly and building things and getting lots of results, but then they're just getting lost. They're not even sure where they're at.
We live now in a documentation first world. Agentic skills, like we identified in our last conversation, are really the instantiation of our institutional IP. When we go to the trouble to encode these agentic skills and to put those skills to work in our MCP, we're encoding our business process, our workflows, our institutional knowledge, and we're moving that institutional knowledge away from tribal knowledge, where it's existed up until now to encoded knowledge. It's written down, and ideally, if the skill is written well, which we discussed last time, in a very compact and effective way so that encoding packs a punch.
Let's make sense of this.
Let's make sense.
Sensemakers.
Hey, we're on a roll. We're cruising with these skills conversations. We talked to Tristan about the benefits of MCP, the kind of downsides of MCP. You've got your new query Tableau data agent skill that's available. Just last week, we dissected with Jonathan Drummy what's the difference between a high caliber, high quality agent skill and this flood of kind of mediocre code gen produced skills that's kind of surging the market. Today, I wanted to come back and look at the ways that MCP and AI and all of these new advancements are potentially increasing fragmentation inside of organizations as opposed to decreasing it. And the whole purpose is to build an effective shared reality and to bring the company together. But these new tools, if not properly harnessed, are actually have the potential to increase fragmentation.
Yeah, you're right. There's a lot to unpack, and that is our job. That's what we're here for. But a lot of action going on in the agent integration space, from people realizing that there's more to the story besides just equipping agent with tools, but also a map of how the business operates. And it's exciting. You can actually combine some of these different approaches into a cohesive strategy.
Yep, and that cohesive strategy, I think, is really important because just kind of rushing to stand up your MCP, fill it with overlapping skills that are not specific, not precise, not encoding an organizational asset in terms of intellectual property, workflow, institutional knowledge, but rather creating diffuse kind of incoherence among the organization can actually be counterproductive.
It can actually be counterproductive. And part of the reason why that happens is that it did solve a problem, which was access. MCP is letting all kinds of knowledge workers and business users let their agents do work for them. Now, that could also lead to a situation where the tools are very generalized and you're getting differing levels of quality in the output of the work. Sometimes the agent just doesn't even know how to put everything together. Neither does the business user. It turns out that if you're not careful, you can take turns in your journey that will lead you to a different conclusion. And it's not what has been found out to be truth after many hours of investment that maybe an expert put in. That is a problem because you can get business users who have the impression that they're moving very quickly and building things and getting lots of results, but then they're just getting lost. They're not even sure where they're at.
Maybe a false sense of confidence, perhaps, because more answers doesn't necessarily mean more alignment. And so in this conversation, let's dive in then, because we've identified that the same agentic skills that you use to build at the command line or that we build to use at the command line that can get kind of a local agent running on my terminal accomplishing things for me can also be repurposed and reused by the central IT group inside of the enterprise MCP. And we've identified that there can be varying levels at which these skills are useful and constructed, and entire marketplaces are coming up And actually, the presence of a skills marketplace inside of your organization is one sign and signal of maturity and governance coming to fruition, because what that means is that you might have, kind of a centrally managed marketplace and then other individual marketplaces within the business unit that have more niche and precise definitions of the centralized skill that has been honed and tuned to accomplish their specific needs. And then the popularity and the activity of these things as they're managed in GitHub repositories and in these marketplaces actually then begin to surface the efficacy of the skills, because everybody has an eye on which ones are working, which ones are not, and the skills that aren't working are being left behind, and the ones that are being more effective are coming to the surface. And so in this conversation, Stefan, I'd love to just dig in about what are the specific ways that we can build these agentic skills in order to enhance the MCP that the enterprise is running.
Great. Yeah. And a very actionable thing that you can do, because it's very likely that you have adopted MCP first. It did come out before skills did, perhaps leading it by a year. So it's very common with people that we talk to at Action, companies that we talk to, that they already have several MCP servers. Now, when you're using any agent tool for analytics, you also want to provide it the context to use those tools correctly. And the governance that you can bring to this type of activity, the analysis of data, is something that is also straightforward to implement or get started with. We have an example for us to have a look. Anthropic wrote how Anthropic enables self-service data analytics with Claude. And we want to use that as an example of what you can do to bring reason and sense to your AI strategy. Primarily, if we scroll a bit down and bring you to the important number in this article is right here. The key takeaway in this very large blog post that the Anthropic team put together is that they were running very formal evaluations on their agents analyzing data, and they realized, sadly, that they were only being accurate 21% of the time, which is very disappointing. They had all these tools and all this infrastructure to use, but they were still missing the mark. And what Anthropic did is that they started writing this knowledge of how the different tables work together, when to use them and how, into a skill, into a set of developer documentations. Essentially, they observed that once they did that, they were getting improvements between 95 and 99% in accuracy from their AI agents, which is amazing.
Right. So before, just the MCP and the infrastructure by itself was giving a 21% accuracy from agentic results, and then honing in with these handwritten skills that define very clearly, this is how things work inside of our organization. This is how our set of tables relate. These are how our business processes function. Move that needle from 21% effective to 90+% effective. That's massive.
It's massive. And a good analogy, I'm not sure if you've watched this movie, but there's a movie called Memento, and AI agents tend to behave like the character from Memento, because if you start a new session with an agent, like a new chat, it has no memory of the previous chats.
You're starting over from scratch.
You're starting over from scratch every conversation. So you have to write down that memory somewhere. In the movie, he would write notes. When you're doing this, you're essentially creating the difference between a brand new analyst that has no idea about how data is used at your company, but knows how Snowflake works, knows how MySQL works. Like, they know the underlying technology, just not how you applied it, versus somebody who's been at the company a few years and already knows all these things.
Right. And so these LLMs are exceptionally powerful because they've been through massive volumes of compute in their training and their data set, but they're completely unfamiliar with your environment. And this is where that authoring of those skills then hones that power into the focus of a laser beam.
It brings it into focus. If you have a Tableau MCP and your Tableau environment is very large, there's many data sources that might be named the same way or have overlapping uses, there's no way for the agent to know about this unless you tell it. unless you explain it.
Right. And so one of the things that's coming up for me, Stefan, is the conversation with Robert Rouse before we departed for the Tableau conference. We live now in a documentation first world. And so it wasn't the case a few years ago that documentation came first. In fact, traditionally in our environment, it's always been documentation last or documentation never. And that entire paradigm has just shifted now 100%. And that's exactly what we're talking about. Robert hit it on the head with that, because these agentic skills, like we identified in our last conversation, are really the instantiation of our institutional IP. When we go to the trouble to encode these agentic skills and to put those skills to work in our MCP, we're encoding our business process, our workflows, our institutional knowledge, and we're moving that institutional knowledge away from tribal knowledge, where it's existed up until now to encoded knowledge. It's written down, and ideally, if the skill is written well, which we discussed last time, in a very compact and effective way, so that encoding packs a punch.
And many times it's called tribal knowledge, but that is the heart and soul of the culture. And it is very important to document it, not only for posterity, but now, especially with agents, it pays off to plan. It pays off to give yourself some time to think through what you want to build and how to architect it before you get started creating a bunch of artifacts that then you'll have to review. Planning and documenting and skills is moving your focus left in the process, not so much, hey, let's get it out quickly, because everybody knows you can have an agent just spit out a lot of code and a lot of markdown. But let's actually take the time to think about what we should build and what we shouldn't build.
Right. And this is really the AI transition, right? So it's the digital transformation that we've been working through for decades now, in terms of getting organizations onto a data-driven structure, a structured data warehouse, structured information and processes, an effective shared reality, as I like to call it, over data. Now, in question are these tribal business processes and this tribal knowledge. It seems most likely that many organizations haven't been built from the ground up in order to support this type of encoding of institutional knowledge. But what seems to me to be absolutely the case is that the future is not going to belong necessarily to those companies that have the most AI. The future is going to belong to the companies that are best at teaching AI how they think, how this company operates, how we do things. And in other words, encoding their specific skills.
I agree with you there. And in fact, I think I would layer something on top of that, or build on top of that, because you can do the effort, if your organization today is not well documented, of covering all those gaps. But then there's also the higher level, let's architect the organization from scratch to meet the needs of this new world. And what is it about what we do that is making us slow or not being able to do this well? That's very difficult. There's some places that are so mature and stuck in their ways that it's going to be hard to do the transformation, but it is going to define a successful organization from one that can't keep up.
Yep. I tagged you on LinkedIn yesterday because I saw this AI generated infographic that was talking about an MCP being the nervous system of an enterprise, and it showed kind of like the evolution of, like, from ape to man, and the MCP is the solution to every problem because it's the nervous system of the enterprise. But if your nervous system in that analogy is chaotic and discoherent and diffuse, then your organization is kind of behaving like a slug, not like a hawk. Right. And so I think what we're coming at here is that the MCP is opening up the door to access. We've basically identified an MCP as nothing more than a tool server that is giving broad access to a wider variety of tools in a consistent location that can support multiple workflows over time. But what's most important is the manner in which. And the manner in which is really determined by the organization's ability to encode those workflows into localized skills that support that institutional knowledge and IP.
Yeah, just to make sure we're all on track here, because we actually do like MCP, and we've been using it ourselves for a while. But what we're saying is, in order to take your MCP to the next level, you need to bring in these skills. You need to document how to use it right.
Right. So it's all about leveraging the MCP, utilizing the construction of these agentic skills to build leverage.
Yeah, I like it. In fact, I have an example that I think the audience will like of an implementation of using skills with MCP together. We saw that Anthropic got great results with this pattern. There's a project called skillsovermcp.com that you can take a look. And what it does is that it says, go write your skills on a GitHub repo, which is the standard way of doing it. Just keep it there. But if you want to merge those both of those worlds, you can set up your MCP to be the server that gives the skills to the agent. In other words, that's basically what it's doing. But what it means, we see this in our reality, is not all the agents out there are ready to support skills out of the box, or even write code or use bash. So they are built to be very compatible with MCP, and therefore MCP is that distribution channel that you need for your skills, and you can use this to get the best of both worlds.
Got it. Okay. And so if I'm an organization, Stefan, that is just beginning to dip a toe in this water, like for example, some of the customers that we talk to haven't even begun to stand up an MCP, or think about the manner in which they're going to make the transition to an agentic first world. What's the place to begin, and what are the high level steps?
I would honestly say, if you're brand new to this, the greatest leverage you will get and the most accessible thing you can do is to write down your workflows and start this documentation process with skills. Once you get started with that, you would be in a really good position to bring in additional tooling via MCP or a variety of options. But to start today, you got to get on the skill game. You have to understand how these work.
Documentation first, writing down your workflow, institutionalizing and coding that institutional knowledge. Okay, and so for the organization that does have various MCPs stood up, but they might be in this diffuse problem where they don't necessarily have a catalog or observability into which skills are behaving others better than others. They don't have an eval framework. There's no clear kind of observability in terms of which ones are performing and which ones aren't. What should they do?
That's difficult, because evals might require more expertise to implement. Ultimately, that's where we should all go. You should definitely have evals in mind, because it is the most formal way to demonstrate that your analytics agents are doing the job correctly. On the other hand, you can also evaluate agents through human feedback and not shy away from getting something out there. It's a little bit ironic, because we mentioned there's a quality problem, but at the same time, the reason people do it is that there's also an attention problem, a distribution problem. If nobody knows about your amazing skills, then only you do. And you do need to get it out there. So make sure they're at least of high quality, and then get it in people's hands so you can get their feedback.
Got it. And then if you're a data leader and you're choosing the business use case with which to attack this, I would say that one of the best things that you can do is narrow the scope of your problem, bite off a business domain use case that you're truly expert in, and then either staff your own or bring in experts like us to pick apart that thing and begin to encode that business process in these agentic skills, and then chip away at the automation so that you can get the agents in play instead of the humans, and then elevate the humans in your organization up so that they then become directors of these very highly capable agents.
Yeah, in fact, you just made me think of a really good battle plan if you want to dip your toes into this skills game. We have action skill to query Tableau. If you have a Tableau environment, you can test that skill today. What you can do to build on top of it, which is what we just described, is to plan for a semantic model. In fact, the Anthropic team, that's what they did. They developed a semantic model that lives as markdown with their code, and therefore they can document all of the nuances of how to actually work with data, the messiness of working with data. But that's something you can do today. You can totally write a working semantic model for your team in Markdown. All you need is a skill like what Action is providing for you to get started.
Right. And then that Markdown approach is very lightweight. It's very nimble. It's flexible. It's not like taking on a six-figure cataloging tool that requires an army of people to implement. And it gives you that flexibility to iterate.
And they got such great results. They're getting 95% accuracy or more.
Yeah, great. Okay, so agentic skills can really elevate your MCP game. If that's a thing that you're thinking about, don't hesitate to give us a call. Thanks, Stefan, for the briefing, and we'll come back and see you guys the next time.
Let's make sense of this.
Let's make sense.